More than 2,000 years ago, in a time of war, political collapse, and relentless philosophical debate, a small and strange book appeared in China. Its name was the Tao Te Ching. It had 81 short chapters. Some were just a few lines long. It didn't argue, it didn't lecture, it didn't even define its own subject. Its first line was a warning. The Tao cannot be named, that can be named is not the eternal Tao. And yet for 25 centuries, people have not stopped trying to name it. To understand Taoism, you have to understand the world it emerged from. The classical period of Chinese philosophy, roughly the 5th to the 3rd century BCE, was an era of profound instability. Kingdoms rose and collapsed, armies marched, scholars debated ferociously about one urgent question: how should human beings live together? Two answers dominated the conversation. The Confucians believed that society should be healed through ritual, hierarchy, and virtue. That if people played their proper roles, as sons or rulers or subjects, order would follow. The Mohists took a different view. They argued for impartial concern, equal love for all people, not just your family or your king. They cared above all about what was useful, what reduced suffering, what worked. Both were ambitious. They were systematic. They both believed that human reason, properly applied, could reveal the right way to live. Taoism, which looked at all of this and said, "You're asking the wrong question," came along after. The Tao Te Ching was attributed to a sage named Laozi, the Old Master, though historians debate whether such a person even existed. What we have is the text itself, and it opens with a riddle that it never resolves. The Tao is the central concept, but it resists every attempt to pin it down. The Tao calls it the mother of 10,000 things, meaning all of existence. It says the Tao gives rise to one gives rise to two gives rise to three, and three gives rise to the 10,000 things. It describes a kind of unfolding, not a God who creates the world from outside it, but something that generates existence from within, without effort or intention. The Tao is not a being. It cannot be seen or heard or touched. It precedes all distinctions between existence and non-existence, between self and the world, between something and nothing. One scholar, Chad Hansen, argued that the Tao is best understood not as a mystical transcendent force, not as something like the Western concept of God, but as the totality of all natural processes, interconnected and whole. Not a realm beyond this world like heaven, but the deep structure of this world in itself. Another philosopher, Angus Graham, placed Taoism in a more combative context. He argued that when Taoists spoke of the Tao, they were deliberately countering the Confucians and Mohists, who each claimed to know the correct human path, the correct moral and social Tao. Taoism rejected both, and instead pointed towards something vast, not the human Tao, but the Tao of heaven and earth, not a set of rules for society, but the pattern underlying all of nature. One of the most distinctive features of Taoism is its suspicion of language, not because it believes that language is useless, but because of what language does to the concept of the Tao. In the Chinese philosophical tradition, to name something is to draw a boundary around it. To say this is a tree is to separate the tree from everything else that is not a tree. In this way, language carves the world into pieces. But the Tao does not have pieces. It is the undivided whole from which all distinctions arise. The moment you name it, it is already distorted. You have made it smaller than what it is. This is why the Tao Te Ching doesn't define the Tao. It circles around it. It uses paradox, metaphor, and analogy. It describes what the Tao is like, rather than what it is. That's not just a problem with mystical concepts. Taoism argues that all of our language hardens what are actually fluid, relative distinctions into fixed categories that feel absolute. We start to confuse our map for the territory. We mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. The Zungazi introduced a concept for this: the equalization of all things, Kiwu. This is not a claim that all things are identical or that distinctions don't exist. It's a challenge to the false certainty we place in categories we've invented. Our labels are human constructions, and they have limits. The Dao De Jing's response to this problem is not to give up on language. It keeps using it, but to use language in a way that constantly undermines itself. Every definition it offers is immediately complicated. Every boundary it draws, it then dissolves. So, if the Tao is the deep pattern of the natural world, then the question becomes, how does a person align themselves with it? To the Taoist, the answer is through Wu Wei. This term is often translated as non-action or effortless action, but neither quite captures it. Wu Wei isn't passivity, it's not laziness, it isn't even doing nothing. Think of water. Water does not force its way through rock. Instead, it flows around it, through the cracks, finding the path of least resistance. Given enough time, water reshapes entire canyons. This is the spirit of Wu Wei. One scholar, Edward Singerland, spent years studying this concept across early Chinese thought. He found Wu Wei appearing in the domain of craftsmanship, in the movement of water, in the performance of music, and in athletic mastery. What these all share is a state where effort has become invisible, where skill has been so deeply internalized that it no longer feels like effort at all. Think of a master calligrapher whose brush moves as if on its own, or a jazz musician improvising, responding to the moment without conscious calculation, or even an athlete in flow, when thinking gets out of the way and the body knows what to do. In the Zhuangzi, there is a famous story of a cook who butchers an ox so perfectly that his knife never even touches the bone. He finds the spaces, the natural pathways through the joints. He has learned the inner structure of the animal so perfectly that effort has dissolved into grace. But here is where Taoism confronts one of its deepest tensions. If Wu Wei is a state of effortlessness, if it is natural and spontaneous, then how do you try to achieve it? The moment you set out to be effortless, you are making an effort. The moment you try to stop thinking, you are thinking about stopping thinking. The very intention undermines the goal. Singerland called this the central paradox of early Chinese cultivation. You can't force your way into Wu Wei. You can't schedule it. The Dao Jing and the Zungazi approach this differently. The Zhuangzi emphasizes spontaneity. Wu Wei is something you fall into, something you might encounter, something you recognize in the moment. But you can't manufacture it. You can only cultivate the conditions that make it possible. The Dao De Jing, meanwhile, treats Wu Wei as a kind of governing principle. For the individual, yes, but also for leaders and rulers. The Sage King does not govern through laws and commands and control. He creates the conditions in which people naturally flourish, and then he gets out of the way. Here we see a Taoist temple, more of a storefront temple, in the Chinatown of New York City, where I live. There is a political dimension to all of this that does often go unnoticed. See, the Dao De Jing was not written in a vacuum. It was written in a world where governed by rulers who used forces, law, regulation, and punishment in order to control their people. The Dao De Jing looked at this and saw a problem. When rulers govern through coercion, the text argues, they breed resistance. They create the very disorder they're trying to prevent. The harder you grip, the more slips through your fingers. The ideal ruler in the Taoist vision is almost invisible. People live well under his rule, and when asked how they are doing, they say we did it ourselves. No one directed us, no one forced us. We simply flourished. This vision has been called anarchist by some scholars, libertarian by others, communitarian by others still. None of these labels fully fit. What the Dao De Jing is really pointing out is something more radical than any political category. The idea that the best kind of leadership might be the kind that leaves the least trace. Early Taoism gave the world something unusual, a philosophy built on its own resistance to being pinned down. It is three things at once: a cosmological principle, a reminder that language hardens what is fluid, and that our categories are not the world. And it is a practical guide, an invitation to move through life with less force, less grasping, and less effort. These three aspects cannot be separated. Because the Tao exceeds language, it can only be approached sideways, through paradox, analogy, and silence. The Dao De Jing knew this about itself. It built its own translatability into its first line, and that is why, 2.5 millennia later, scholars are still arguing about what it means, and practitioners are still finding something in it that no argument can quite reach. Remember, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, but maybe the point was never to name it.